opened up in Portland, and really they didn't make great beer, and they didn't last very long. And strangely enough, they bought the bottling line from the 7-Up bottling company across the street, and they never even stopped in and saw me. So that I was irritated about that. There was like 6 of us in the country making beer. They came to Chico to buy this bottling line and didn't stop in. Anyway, they didn't have a good lab. They didn't have any lab, and they didn't have good beer, and they only lasted about 2 years. And so one of the things that we understood going into the business was we better have decent quality control and put in procedures so we can make consistent beer. Eventually, we dumped the first 10 beers, and which was very, very hard for us to do because we had no money at the time and we were really struggling. We really needed to sell some beer, but we made the decision that if it wasn't right, we weren't going to sell it. So that took us almost 3 months to figure out our woes, which we finally did. It was a problem with not enough oxygen for our yeast. I showed you that portable cooler where the wort came down on the outside and splashed. We figured there was enough oxygen being entrained in the wort on its way down this open cooler that the oxygen should be enough for the yeast to survive. As it turned out, it was not quite enough, and the yeast was a little sluggish. Batch after batch, it would slow down a little bit more and a little bit more, and we were getting inconsistent fermentations. But we invested in a lab. Don't show here. We had a microscope, though. We didn't have a lot of stuff, but we knew what we needed to do on a basic level, and we did it. Today, we actually have very sophisticated laboratories. This is our research and development laboratory. We've got some PhDs in there, and we're really very focused on trying to up our game all the time. So we're always looking at how to make our beer better. We've got a very dedicated staff that focuses on nothing other than let's figure out what we can do and figure out how to do it better. So they don't do quality control. We have a separate laboratory for quality control. These guys are really focused mainly on trying to push our game a little bit higher. Gas chromatographs. This is a picture of our young GC guy. He looks a lot older now. He's been here a few years. Back in those days, this was our quality control staff. This is what we did for quality every day. Okay, I'm hoping I'm going to get to the torpedo pictures. I can talk about torpedo before the food shows up, but maybe I'll have to talk about it first. But, so back in these days, we sipped and we did some lab work. But and if you came on a tour, this is where you would end up, and that's the seat out of our delivery truck. And this was our equivalent of our present pub. We didn't have any food, though. But today we have a very focused quality control sensory team, and we actually have 2 full-time staff that do nothing but organize tastings. We taste beer, we taste water, we taste malt. Everything that goes into the beer gets rigorously tasted every day. Even though we've got a lot of fancy equipment that costs a lot of money, the human nose still really, and taste buds is really very important and critical in how beer tastes. So you can't analyze for everything. My early brew house, again, a home-built equipment. That was some hopper out of a dried milk plant I picked up. And all along Acre was starting to gain some momentum, and they were the only small brewery in America that was growing at that time, besides us really little guys. And so he really set the stage for raising the stature of beer in the U.S. and was starting to expand. I think it was at 20,000 barrels or something at this point, or 25,000 barrels. So we were starting to take off as well. The last picture had 2 fermenters. I had to add 2 more, so we now had 4 fermenters, and we could actually get up to almost 3,000 barrels of beer a year. And we thought we were doing wonderfully well, which we were, considering the times. And then another year later, I had to put bigger ones in. These are 17-barrel fermenters. This was the first new equipment I bought. Everything else had been cast off, but these were actually fermentation tanks made for us. And this is our current open fermenters, and somebody asked a question about open fermentation. This is what they look like. This is the Kellerweiss being brewed in the open fermenter, and actually removing some of the protein off the surface of the fermentation. Scott Jennings, who runs our pilot brewery. I'm going to show a little video, and then I'll talk about torpedo. And this is a Bigfoot fermentation from 2009. It actually has sound, too. This is a beer we started playing around with a number of years ago, and the torpedo is a process that we sort of created, which allows us to infuse fresh whole cone hops. You go ahead and start eating. Whole cone hop aroma into our beers, and we've done a technique for almost 30 years called dry hopping, where during the aging process we actually age the beer on fresh whole cone aroma hops. And hops are typically boiled in the beer, and the boiling process extracts the bitterness, but it tends to drive off most of the aroma. Depending on how long you boil it, the longer you boil it, the more aroma is driven off. And so brewers in Europe years and years ago used to put a handful of fresh hops into the barrel of beer when they put the bung in. And so when it was served, it had some of that nice hop character to it. So we started doing that with our Celebration Ale almost 30 years ago in our Bigfoot, where we put fresh hops into the aging tanks and would age them in the presence, sort of like tea bags, presence of whole cone hops. And we started experimenting with a way where we could pack big stainless steel cylinders full of fresh hops and actually circulate the beer through that hop bed. And so we created this beer we call Torpedo, and it's in a vessel that sort of looks like a big torpedo is how it got its name. And you'll see later, I'll show a picture of not how it got its name, but when we first came out with our Pale Ale back in 1980, it was really considered to be a very extreme hoppy beer, and it really was sort of out of the norm for most of the beers that were available back in those days. And over the years, as the craft movement has really taken hold, and there's been a lot of experimentation, a lot of pushing boundaries, our Pale Ale has a value number of about 36 or 37 for the bitterness units, compared to an American light lager that might be about 7 or 8. So that's sort of the range. And the American light lagers used to be about 15 or 16, and have been steadily falling. If you drank one of the mainstream beers 20 years ago, it would be a 16 bitterness unit. That same beer today would be probably 8. So the major brewers have used less and less hops over the years. But when we came out with our Pale Ale, it was very hoppy compared to everything else. Today, there's beers that are on the market that are 100 bitterness units or so. And so the whole paradigm has shifted so much that people now are really enjoying these very robust and aromatic and bitter characters to balance the malt sweetness. So our Pale Ale is becoming a little bit of a milder style in the world of craft brewing. So our Torpedo was our first entry in a big way to sort of give the consumer more hops. So this is in the 60 bitterness unit level. More hops and more malt. So this is a fairly strong, hoppy, aromatic, fairly alcoholic beer. And it balances well, I think, it will shoot with the beef. I'll take questions after this next round, so think of any if you want to ask me.